The 6-year-old boy is lugging a box of bullets heavier than he is through the battlefield. He had just delivered the bullets to the front line. The veteran ordered him to go back to his command post and hide. The boy shakes his head. He didn't want to be a deserter. But the old soldier told him, a true soldier must first obey orders. The boy hesitated for a long time and then agreed. An artillery shell suddenly fell and blew the telephone line. The command post was instantly disconnected from the front line. No one noticed that the boy had quietly left the command post. He ran his little hand along the telephone line. He went back to the battlefield. In order not to be discovered by the enemy, he squirmed and crawled on his little body on the ground. At this point, shells were falling all around him. Any piece of shrapnel could have hurt him. The boy soon spotted the wounded correspondent. He told him to hold on while he pulled the half wire from his hands. Then he found the other wire that had been blown off under fire. He connected the two wires and communications were restored, and the tide turned quickly. He was the youngest soldier in Soviet history. Sergei, he was just 6 years old when he enlisted. Not long before the war spread to his hometown, he managed to escape under the cover of his mother. But as soon as he turned around, he saw his former home burn down. Not daring to look any further, he turned around and ran for the woods. But it wasn't long before Sergei lost his way. Sergei didn't let the odds get him down. He tried to keep himself alive. When he was hungry, he ate wild fruits. When he was thirsty, he drank rainwater. When his shoes were worn out, he tied bark on his feet. He was exhausted after several days in the wilderness. Before long he passed out from exhaustion. Fortunately, some Soviet scouts found him and brought him back to the barracks. At that moment Sergei came to his senses. He looked at the group of soldiers around him and trembled in fear. The commander reassured him that no one could harm you here. They asked him where his parents were. Sergei couldn't stop crying when he heard that. The crowd also understood instantly and hugged him. They couldn't bear to remind him of the tragedy. When the cook heard that a child had come to the barracks, he brought him a precious stew and fruit and gave him a good meal. But this was the front line after all. Sergei had to be transferred to a hospital in the rear. When the nurses treated him, they found that his body was covered with wounds.
Смотри, видишь, у меня цветочек получился.
Нет, цветочек мне не нравится. Вы мне танк нарисуйте.
Хорошо.
Sergei became the darling of the army after that. Busy commanders would visit him whenever they could. Some would give him binoculars as toys. Others would find ways to get him candy. In a battlefield full of smoke and mirrors, this 6-year-old child was like an angel who gave hope to the desperate and numb soldiers. So everyone wanted Sergei to stay in the barracks. But the commander knew very well, the battlefield is not a playground. Countless people die here every day. The orphanage is where he should be. At least there was no war there. It wasn't long before Sergei finally recovered. It was time for him to say goodbye to this place. Before he left, the commander gave him a wooden gun and told him to protect himself. But Sergei suddenly hugged him. When the commander heard this, he finally realized that he had become the only one Sergei could rely on. So he changed his mind. He adopted Sergei and kept him with him. Everyone in the barracks was happy. The tailor even prepared a gift for him overnight. The next day, Sergei ran around excitedly in a uniform of his own. Everyone saluted when they saw him. But then the enemy air raid came. The camp was in chaos. After the air raid was over, many men were seriously wounded. Sergei approached the commander and said he wanted to thank the tailor who had made his uniform. Instead, the commander took him to a bomb crater. Sergei looked at the sewing machine in the rubble and understood everything. He takes off his hat, just like the commander, and observes a moment of silence for those who have died. To repay the soldiers who had protected him, Sergei started to help deliver the mail. He found that even when people who were usually serious received letters from home, they would dance like children with excitement. But once he ran for a long time with a letter, but no one came to claim it. A veteran took him into his arms and told him that the soldier had died. So Sergei took off his hat and stood there for a long time in silence. Most of the men in the army could not read or write. Whenever a letter came from home, they asked the commissar to read it. But during one of the battles, the commissar was killed. A wounded man took a letter out of his arms and asked Sergei to read it. He was only 6 years old and couldn't read it, but he couldn't bear to disappoint the soldiers. So he had to make up some nice story about how the war would soon be over. The family was waiting for him to return. He made the soldiers laugh. They had already heard that Sergei was lying. They just wanted to believe it more than anyone else. Sergei has been given a new assignment to patrol the nearby jungle. Suddenly, he spots something in his binoculars. An army boot. No, it was a foot. Sergei ran quickly back to the camp and told the others about it, although no one wanted to believe the information of a 6-year-old. But the scouts decided to go with him to check it out to make him happy. As soon as they reached the jungle, they realized something was wrong. So as not to spook them, they set the haystack on fire. They were able to force 2 enemy soldiers out of it. Sergei also captures a radio. These 2 men were German scouts responsible for transmitting the coordinates of the Soviet troops for the bomber raids. Sergei's actions saved the lives of all the men. With the coordinates exposed, the troops had to be temporarily transferred back to headquarters. The general heard about Sergei's exploits and decided to put him to the test. So he sent him to review the troops outside. The veterans didn't care about Sergei at first. They even teased him with chocolate. Sergei was about to take it, but then his little hand suddenly withdrew. He had a serious face. The veterans didn't dare to make any more jokes about him. They immediately assembled the troops for the parade of the 6-year-old. Sergei walked to the front in front of all the soldiers, kicking in the right direction and walking slowly. The general himself gave him his rank in recognition of his distinguished service. From this moment on, he finally became a real soldier. This is a film based on a true story. On the surface, it's just a story of a boy growing up in a war. But when you think about it, what forced him to become a frontline soldier at the age of 6? There is a scene in the film when the nurse persuades the commander to keep Sergei. The commander says,
Ребенку здесь не место.
Ты посмотри, что они сбрасывают.
Здесь никому не место.
You can subscribe and leave comments if you have any ideas. Thanks for watching. See you next time.